on the other, that geology is documented by evolution. Isn't this a circular argument? Biologists, help. Good name for the article. They need some help. It's all based on circular reasoning, folks. It cannot be denied that from a strictly philosophical standpoint, geologists are here arguing in a circle. The succession of organisms has been determined by a study of their remains embedded in the rocks, and the relative ages of the rocks are determined by the remains of the organisms they contain. That's how it's done, folks. Encyclopedia Britannica. These aren't creationist publications. This geologic column contains all sorts of different rock layers. We have limestone, sandstone, conglomerate, shale, etc. And they're scattered all through there. For instance, here we have limestone, limestone, limestone. If I handed a geologist a piece of limestone and said, how old is it? There is only one possible way he could tell the age of the limestone. I mean, how do you tell the difference between 100 million year old Jurassic limestone and 600 million year old Cambrian limestone? It's limestone, and it's found all through the geologic column. How do you tell the age of this limestone? There's only one way it can be done, by the index fossils. They're dating the rocks by the fossils. So if they say they have found the geologic column in 26 locations, what she really means is they have found certain fossils in those 26 locations. That's how it was determined. And I would say in a worldwide flood in the days of Noah, you would find all sorts of fossils in all sorts of places. Radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. Now, what on earth do you mean by that, Mr. O'Rourke? You can't date things by radiometric dating unless you know the approximate age they come from. Go to any laboratory where they do carbon dating. I challenge you to do this. Take in a sample and ask them, would you please carbon date this? Get something like charcoal that's easier to carbon date, and they will make you fill out several pages of papers telling where did you find it, what fossils were associated with it, how old do you think it is. Look, carbon dating is not a blind test. They go into this very primed looking for a particular age, which is why the frozen dinosaur bones that were found in Antarctica were not carbon dated. They would have given some number, much less than the 70 million they're looking for. They'll say, well, it's because carbon dating only goes to 50,000 years. Well, we'll talk more about that later. I'll show you how carbon dating really works if you'd like to know. Here's an index fossil from a textbook. It says a trilobite is an index fossil. If you find a trilobite in a rock layer, the rock layer was probably formed 500 million years ago. They date the layers by the fossils. That's how it's done universally. All this happened in the early 1800s for lots of political and scientific reasons, I'm sure. But we can talk about the politics behind it if you like. But here's a petrified fossil of a human shoe print where a man stepped on a trilobite. William Meister found it in 1968. This is from Reader's Digest, Mysteries of Then Explained, page 38. Another view of it, showing a trilobite larger than that. It's all based on index fossils. Let me see here. If you took this rock to any university and said, how old is this rock? They would say, oh, this is easy. This contains an index fossil. It's called a graptolite. And the graptolite is the index fossil for 410 million year old rock. It is the New York State fossil. Look it up in the encyclopedia, graptolites. Automatically it'll say 410 million years old. That's what's been done for the last 150 years. Graptolites are one of the index fossils. But in 1993, they discovered graptolites are still alive in the South Pacific. Earth Magazine, September 93. Well, if they're still alive, maybe they could be found in any rock layer. There's indication there are some trilobites still alive in the deep Peruvian trench. Some of the deep research vessels have said it looks like there might be trilobites down there. I don't know, it doesn't matter. The fact is, there's no such thing as an index fossil. But all of geology is built around these index fossils being in a particular order. So if you find a rock containing a trilobite on top of a mountain, it got there by an overthrust or something. They will figure out some way to explain how this 500 million year old rock is on top. Anything except the obvious, that maybe the fossils don't mean anything. But all of the geologic column is based on index fossils. Dinosaur blood found in bone. Medical pathologists examined dinosaur bone under a microscope and found dinosaur blood inside the bone. Earth Magazine, June 97. Now, how can blood survive for 70 million years? 18 million year old magnolia leaves from Idaho shale were still green when the rock was cracked open. Campbell is a far cry from a creationist. Fossil bees, 25 million years old, contain ancient germinating bacteria in their abdomens. I don't think so, folks. Those are not millions of years old. These petrified trees that are found standing straight up all over the world, they're called polystrata fossils, indicate the layers did not form slowly over millions of years. The layers formed rapidly before the trees could rot. I have seen scores of these things. Petrified trees running through multiple rock layers. Those rock layers are not different ages. Sometimes the petrified trees are upside down, running through rock layers. I think the best explanation of this type of thing is a worldwide flood in the days of Noah, just like the Bible says, where you would get the earth covered with water. The earth is still spinning under the moon. The moon doesn't know there's a flood going on. So the moon is still pulling up on the water, causing the tides. But now you have a unique problem in a worldwide flood, because if the earth was totally covered by water, there would be no continents to stop the tides. I live in Florida. The tides wash up on the beach and they wash back down. But if there were no continents to stop them, the tides would become harmonic. They reinforce each other after a while. And laboratory tests have indicated if the earth were covered by water, the tides would be 200-foot tidal change every 6 hours and 25 minutes. Well, I was up at the Bay of Fundy a few months ago and watched the tide come in 100 feet. And the erosion is incredible along the edge of that place. Go to the Bay of Fundy in Canada and you'll see what I mean. I mean, that tide comes roaring in there. They put rubber rafts out there and you pay $10 to get in the raft and you go surfing in front of the tide. You surf upriver about 30 miles. Well, time, okay. The erosion from the moon, from the tides during the worldwide flood, would cause thousands and thousands of feet of sedimentation. That's why we have fossil layers. That's why we have layers containing zillions of dead things. It formed in a flood. The earth is speaking to us as loud as it can that there was a flood, the judgment of God, not millions of years of evolution. Thank you.
My first question for Kent Hovind is, you describe a flood 4,400 years ago, an evolution of varieties from a single kind. With the degree of change that you imply in less than 1,000 years or so, why do you not consider yourself to be an evolutionist? Because whether you realize this or not, you're accepting a rate of change since the alleged flood that any real evolutionary biologist would find absurd.
The rate of change that Christians, that creationists say happens is within the limits of the biblical kind. Charles Darwin, in 1859, sailed around the world and ended up, one of the places he stopped was the Galapagos Islands. Here on those islands, he saw 14 varieties of finches. He decided, after studying them carefully, by the way, he hated birds because he liked worms, and he thought it was kind of cruel for birds to eat worms, so he shot every bird he could find. And he collected all sorts of these birds, and Charles Darwin said, I think all these birds had a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. It was a bird. And then Charlie said later in his book, on page 170, in his book, Origin of Species, Charlie said, it is a truly wonderful fact that all animals and all plants, throughout all time and space, should be related to each other. So the birds and the bananas are related, according to Darwin. And I'm sure Dr. Bartelt feels the same way. If you go back far enough in time.